were here last week, we started working on the Psalms of Disorientation, the Psalms that are written out of the pits. And let me just review. Anybody here, this is your first time? Okay, have a couple. Let me just try to locate you real quick. We're talking about the Psalms actually coming from three different places. The first one that we worked on were the Psalms of Orientation. These are the Psalms that actually root us in the world, a world of structure and order. And they're primarily Psalms about praising God for an ordered creation that we can live in and that we have food in, and the sun comes up every morning and the moon at night, and life just happens with some kind of structured order. And so those are called Psalms of Orientation. Also, the Psalms that are about the law, the ones that give thanks to God for law and structure and wisdom as to how we live our lives. So these are the Psalms that just kind of give us a bedrock to stand on, to live on, a pathway forward. The next section of Psalms, the middle part, are Psalms of Disorientation. That's when life's not working right. It's not going like it ought to. Things are just out of control in every way. And we spent last Wednesday night and we'll spend tonight working in Psalms of Disorientation. Last week we worked on the issue of an enemy has struck. Someone has come after us, done something to us, said something about us, hurt us, harmed us in some way, but an enemy has struck. And out of the raw octane of that experience with an enemy, there are Psalms that are written that call out to God and ask God to do something about it. So we looked at the structures of those Psalms last Wednesday night and how they work. And more than anything, they give to us a sense that it really is okay for us to bring the raw octane of our wounded experiences into the presence of God, and in very graphic and honest language, tell God what was done to us, why it hurts. We even cry out for God to do some payback on our behalf. Deal with this person, God, because I don't know what else to do. So there's that sense of these Psalms, and they're Psalms we never read in church. I just never hear anybody pick one of those Psalms and say, hey, why don't all of us happy worshipers read this together? God, why don't you bust them in the nose? We don't go to those, but they're pretty thick if you work through the Psalms. Tonight we're going to work on a different experience than enemies. This is also a disorienting time. We're going to work on when God seems absent. We've gone through something and God just doesn't seem to be present or care or be doing anything. But I'm very careful to say this. It's not that God is absent, but it is true that we are experiencing God as absent. I don't know if you've gone through those times in your life or not, but I have. I remember early in one particular ministry, I went through 7 or 8 weeks of what the saints call the dark night of the soul. It's just when, your prayers feel like they're not getting above the ceiling, and, you're in the middle of a worship gathering with people, and zippo, you don't feel anything about it, and you read the Bible and nothing comes alive to you. There are times like that we go through, and the old saints called it the dark night of the soul. And so those are difficult times. That's a little bit of what we're going to work in tonight. When you feel like you're living in that dark night of the soul and you don't know what to do about it. So I've brought 2 sermons tonight. I've never tried this before. They're not real long, but I'm going to walk us through 2 different Psalms just by kind of taking a deep dive in it. And if you want, just start jotting down the questions that this raises for you. What does this make you think about? What do you wonder about in the middle of this? So the first one tonight that we're going to work in will be Psalm 77. So if you want to turn and take a look at that, and we will go there. We'll go there in just a minute. I'll sort of walk us I'll walk us into that. We live in a provocative age. People are tired of feeling pain and not being heard by those who have the power to do something about it. So they are dumping out their pent-up anger about that. Thousands of youth are calling for actions on school shootings. DACA students are protesting to live where they were born so that they can get a college education. Women are protesting sexual abuse with the Me Too movement. Before those, there were protests of Occupy Wall Street, St. Louis shootings, the shutdown of Mission Avenue in Chicago, Black Lives Matter. It's a provocative age. There are groups of people all over the place that are provoking some kind of response from people who have authority because they're tired of feeling pain and not being heard by those who have the power to do something about it. Being ignored is no fun. Do you know how to provoke a response? My wife does. When I'm sitting there at the breakfast table and I've got a book in front of me, or I'm reading the newspaper, or I've got my cell phone up there and I'm not listening to her, she just goes into this. Why, thank you, Wall. It is so enjoyable conversing with you today. I enjoy hearing my own voice bounce back to me because the other person here at the table is certainly not paying any attention to me at all. She's provoking a response. And I suppose all of that started a long time ago way out west when one gunslinger stood in the street outside the saloon and called out to another one in there, "Cactus Jack, I'm calling you out." Teens slam doors or sulk to get a response. Children throw tantrums. Wives complain. Husbands pout. Church members write anonymous notes. Pastors whine in sermons. Coaches stare at referees. Lovers clam up. All of this in quest of a response. We're in really good company in Psalm 77 because the one being provoked for a response is God. Our friend is in a desperate situation and he needs God to act. So, this is what he says. And again, I'm in the Message tonight. I love the Message is just the best translation when it comes to the Psalms of disorientation. So, he says, I yell out to God. I yell out with all my might. I yell at the top of my lungs. I found myself in trouble and went looking for my Lord. My life was an open wound that wouldn't heal. When friends said, everything will turn out all right, I didn't believe a word they said. This is one of those Psalms from the pit. What's the trouble here? We don't know. We really don't know. Most of the lament Psalms are fill-in-the-blank prayers. You can insert your own trouble into these particular Psalms. Loss of a loved one, failing a class, losing a job, Alzheimer's, moving to a town you hate, a really bad boss, kids in trouble, friends on drugs, deep loneliness, checkbook bleeding red, opioids, a relationship that came to a brutal end. There's trouble in the pits, and we want God to do something about it. Psalm 77 has been where we live. It's a prayer uttered in the dark. The provoker wants God to pay attention. Notice that God is not directly addressed. The assumption is that God is overhearing the whining and complaining that is going on. So he continues, verse 4 of Psalm 77. I remember God and shake my head. I bow my head and then I wring my hands. I'm awake all night, not a wink of sleep. I can't even say what's bothering me. I go over the days one by one. I ponder my years gone by. I strum my guitar all through the night, wondering how to get my life together. And then he asks these 7 questions in a row. Will the Lord walk off and leave us for good? Will he ever smile again? Is his love worn threadbare? Has his salvation promise burned out? Has God forgotten his manners? Has he angrily stalked off and left us? And this section closes with, just my luck, I said. The high God goes out of business the moment that I need him. Now, do you ever pray like that? Does that sound like your prayers? For most of us, no. Because those of us who've been raised in church, we've been taught to make nice with God. You say praisey, flowery kind of things to God all the time. You would never stand in front of the heavenly saloon and call God out and say, it's going to be a showdown right here at noon with us. We'd never suggest that God has forgotten his manners or left us in the lurch or exhausted us. These are uncomfortable prayers to even hear. But prayers like this and about 30 others are in our Bible. They made the editor's cut, and I'm really glad they did. Remember that particular time that I was in Raleigh, North Carolina, and I went through that dark night of the soul that I was telling you about, just muttering to God all that time. I've been at these places before, and many of you have. And for some reason, we believe we've done something wrong. And God has removed himself because of something that we have done. And I'm pretty convinced that's the lie of the devil, to tell us that this is all our fault. If we were better Christians, we wouldn't experience times like this. I've been at the point where other people feel like our Psalm 77 friend, and they've come by to see the holy clergyman because they've prayed, they've waited, they bargained, and nothing. I don't think they're giving up. I just think because they don't think God's answering, they want another Christian to hear what it is that they have to say. When they come and tell me about these kind of times, their cries from the pit, I usually don't try to correct them. I just tell them stories. I tell them stories about my sister Vicky, who had a little baby, and they told her right after the baby was born, there's a heart defect, the baby's not going to live but a day or two. And Vicky began to pray, and she felt the Lord said to her, the baby's going to be okay. And the doctors kept coming in and saying, you've got to convince her that her baby's going to die. She's just not dealing with reality. And Vicky continued to pray. And how that's about a 35-year-old young woman who's a stewardess on a Southwest Airlines flight somewhere in the world tonight, healthy as a horse. I tell them that story. And then I tell them the story of Mark and Chrissy and walking across a cold, frozen Chicago cemetery one day and laying into a grave, a casket that couldn't have been any longer than this, their baby boy that had been born, and how it was just the three of us. And I remembered carrying that casket in my own hands, just walking out to that place. And I remembered putting that little body in the ground and walking out of there with Mark and Chrissy, and their life had come to an end. I mean, they were just really sure that life would never, never be good again. How do you survive something like this? So cold, so lonely, so brokenhearted. And today they're parents of twins, twin boys, one of them who bears the middle name of the little baby brother that died. I tell them stories about Kyle Funke, one of my favorite Trevecca students in all the years I've been there, and how Kyle would go to Vanderbilt Hospital in the morning and get all of his chemotherapy pumped into his body, and then show up back on campus and start taking classes around noon until about 4 in the afternoon. How Kyle was on the honor roll, and his courage and grace were so powerful and beautiful. And Kyle made it all the way to his junior year, the end of his junior year, before he passed away. And I remember making a trip all the way 500 miles away with a bunch of students out of his dorm. And we presented at the funeral, his mom and dad, we presented them his graduation certificate. And we said to them, he may not have finished college, but he taught us all more than what a college education ever would. And how his memory today lives on in such beautiful ways as we remember him, All Saints Day, just this past week on our campus. These kind of places that people get where you say, where is God? How will we survive this? What are we going to do about this? Telling stories seems to help, because our friend in Psalm 77 now begins to tell a story. in the middle of all his calling out to God and where are you and asking these 7 questions about are you done with us, he goes into a story. And it goes like this. Once again, he says, I'll go over what God has done. I'll lay out on the table all God's ancient wonders. I'll ponder the things he's accomplished. I'll give a long, loving look at your acts. O God, your way is holy. No God is great like God. You're the God who makes things happen. You showed everyone what you can do. You pulled your people out of the worst kind of trouble, rescued the children of Jacob and Joseph. And we're beginning to recognize he's talking about the Exodus. Under slavery, God heard their cries. God called Moses. Plagues came. A Red Sea opened up. A God who hears us when we cry. Every time I think of that and read those verses, I remember my friend Ron Benefiel. Ron was president of the seminary that I graduated from, Nazarene Theological Seminary. And his wife contracted cancer, and we prayed, and God healed her, beautifully healed her. And she went another 3 or 4 years, and then the cancer returned with a vengeance, and we lost her. I was with Ron at another friend's funeral not long after that, and I just caught him out of the corner of my eye during the funeral, and he was just standing there weeping. So after the funeral, I made my way over to him, and I said, "How are you doing?" And he said, "You know, sometimes Christians don't know how to be with one another in really dark times." He said, "Everybody keeps sending me the verse, Romans 8:28, in all things God works together for the good of those who love him, to those who are called according to his purposes." He says, "I'm really not getting much help there because I'm having a hard time figuring out how God was working for good in the loss of my wife." He said, "But I am getting some great help from the verse before that one. Meanwhile, the moment we get tired in the waiting, God's Spirit is right alongside helping us along. If we don't know how or what to pray, it doesn't matter because he does our praying in us and for us, making prayer out of our wordless sighs and our aching groans. He knows us far better than we know ourselves. He knows our condition, and he keeps us present before God." He said that verse that talks about Jesus holding us in the presence of God and praying for us when all we can do is groan. Jesus takes our groans and turns them into prayer and holds us in the presence of God. I think the most important lesson to be learned out of Psalm 77 is that God is in the cry. And when people ask the question, where is God in this? God is the one who is in us, crying out, "Where are you, God?" Now, catch that. The "where are you, God" that's coming from us, that's actually God. That's God present, helping us to take this kind of pain into the presence of God. Back to Psalm 77. Ocean saw you in action. Just, here's the Red Sea, going through the Red Sea. Ocean saw you in action, God. Saw you and trembled with fear. Deep ocean was scared to death. Clouds belched buckets of rain. Sky exploded with thunder. Your arrows flashing this way and that. From whirlwind came your thundering voice. Lightning exposed the world. Earth reeled and rocked. And you strode right through the ocean. Walked straight through the roaring ocean. But nobody saw you come or go. Hidden in the hands of Moses and Aaron, you led your people through the sea like a flock of sheep. And that's how Psalm 77 ends. No resolution, no answer, only a story about a time when they were between the devil and the deep blue sea, and God brewed up a storm and opened a pathway for them to get through. Is a story enough for you? If not the story of Exodus, maybe the story of Holy Week, where Jesus hangs on a cross and prays one of these Old Testament disoriented lament psalms. And he prays Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me?" If Jesus can experience God in that way, we can too. Sooner or later, if not now, you will find yourself in a pit, in trouble, and provoking God to respond by saying, "Where are you, God?" The Hebrew children ask it. Noah, waiting for the rain to stop, ask it. Job on the ash heap, ask it. Psalmists in trouble, ask it. Jews marching into gas ovens during Hitler's regime, ask it. African slaves in the bottom of ships, ask it. Mothers with bombs raining down on their babies have asked it. Persecuted Christians ask it. The poor ask it. Innocent prisoners ask it. Victims ask it. Diseased bodies ask it. Depressed minds ask it. You and I ask that. Where are you, God? To be in the dark is hard, but to be in the dark alone is almost unbearable. When you look at Mark's gospel, there's an interesting thing that happens. It's kind of written like an onion. And if Jesus is the core of the onion, you have Jesus collecting all of these people around him as you go through the first part of the Gospel of Mark. He calls disciples, picks up followers, people begin to follow him, crowds come out to him. It's like the onion gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And then from the moment he is betrayed and turned over to be crucified, the onion gets peeled. Strips begin to come off, layers begin to come off. All his support disappears. The disciples are afraid. And even Peter says, "I don't even know the man." Until Jesus is left there, hanging alone by himself on a cross, saying Psalm 22, my God, why have you forsaken me?" This reality of what it is like to try to make it through these particular times is a very, very difficult thing for us to do. Now, let me do a little work here because this is important theological work. That moment of Jesus on the cross saying, my God, why have you forsaken me? Some, I believe, have wrongly interpreted that as because Jesus was bearing the sin of humankind, that God, too holy to look upon sin, turned his back upon Jesus. And that's why Jesus said, why have you forsaken me? I don't believe that. I don't believe that for 1 minute. Because the scripture says that God was in Christ in that moment, reconciling the world to himself. I've been in hospital rooms when they brought in a deformed child, badly deformed child, to give to the mother, the father, shortly after the birth. And I've seen all kind of scenes, and I've seen all kind of brokenness. But I'll tell you, the one thing I've never seen is I've never seen a mother turn her back on that child. I have never seen it. What I've seen is, give her to me. Give her to me. And the holding close that happens with that. In the cross, God is near to the flesh and blood Jesus, deeply near. God has not abandoned Jesus, but Jesus, bearing the darkness of the world, experiences the Father as absent in that moment. There's all kind of atonement theories that come in here, trying to explain why Christ died. I was embarrassed for a long time that I didn't have an atonement theory. I know them all. There's a substitutionary theory that says that Jesus went to the cross and died for our sin because we couldn't. He had to, the Father had to put forth a substitute for us. There's partial truth in that. There really is. There's the moral influence theory that Jesus wanted to give us an example of how to lay down our life for others. There's some truth in that one. And there's the penal satisfaction theory, and I hate this one, I really do. God was really ticked off at all of us, really ticked off, and somebody was going to take the beating. So Jesus was the one that had to take the beating for us. To posture God as an angry God needing to exact this kind of suffering upon his own son, I just think that's a horrible theology of God. Then there's the Christus Victor theory of atonement, which is that in the cross, Jesus overcomes Satan, death, and the grave on our behalf. I think I like that one the best. But one Easter, I was actually preaching through all of these lament psalms, and I understood something about God in these psalms that I had never understood before. And it was this, that in Jesus, God has already gone down into all of the pits that human beings will find themselves in. There is no dark, hard place that you can ever go that Jesus' footprints aren't already there. There is no place you will ever go that Jesus has not already gone to the depths of that level of darkness and suffering for you. In Jesus, God has gone to where we are troubled and abandoned and life is taken from us. And he hangs there for us and as us. The cross is God's way of saying, I am there with you when you don't know it. I am the cry that's rising up in you, even when you experience me as absent. You will never go to a place I've not already been. If you look into the darkness, you will see my footprints. I am there praying for you and in you and through your cries. And this changes the way that we can pray in the dark. And then I close this with, this is a blog that I wrote shortly before my mother passed. This is her last night in her home of the past 46 years. Tomorrow morning, she will be lovingly escorted to the East Macomb nursing home where the last chapter of her life will begin. None of us know how long or short that chapter will be. Dad is 86. He's 97 now, so you can see that 11 years ago. Dad is 86, in relatively good health and very tired. He has cared for her as long as he could. Tonight he will sleep with her. Tomorrow night he will sleep by himself, alone for the first time in 60 years. His questions have been fair. Why? Why her? Why now? Why this? Mom has spent her life in service to God in the church. Pianist, church treasurer, Sunday school teacher, maker of Kool-Aid for 60 years worth of vacation Bible schools. It couldn't have happened to a finer woman, but it did happen to her. Dad's prayers, which have moved mountains across the decades, did not budge this one. Alzheimer's came, and it has kept on coming. Dad keeps asking me why. I'm a pastor, and I'm supposed to have answers for questions like these. He is grieving. He feels alone and abandoned. He says the house is very dark at night. Will God come to him in the dark? Will God hear his prayers? And Mom, does God go to nursing homes? Can God come to one whose grasp of history is fading? To one who cannot recall the Bible stories that have shaped her? To one who will soon wonder who the people are that are smiling at her? I'm a trained theologian. I'm not looking for a full-blown theology here. I've preached sermons to people with my questions and even written books to answer them. I know the answers. Religion, good religion, is loaded with helpful answers. Bad religion isn't even worth the effort. But what I hope for my mother and father is not answers, but presence. The presence of God in the East Macomb nursing home. And so the psalmist writes, is there any place I can go to avoid your spirit, to be out of your sight? If I climb to the sky, you're there. If I go underground, you're there. To the pit, you're already there. If I flew on morning's wings to the far western horizon, you'd find me in a minute because you're already there waiting. Then I said to myself, oh, he even sees me in the dark. At night, I'm immersed in your light. It's a fact. Darkness isn't dark to you. Night and day, darkness and light, they're all the same to you. Psalm 139, verses 7 to 12. The next time you find yourself asking God, where are you? Stop and listen carefully. God is the one inside of you asking that very question. His presence is your ability to pray and ask God where he is in that moment. You want to unpack that one a little bit, and then we'll look at another one. Questions or comments out of that? want to just sit with that a little bit, don't you? We've got to capture this wisdom for the ages.
Oh, yes, wisdom. I remarked as you were describing the I am there. I just sharing this with my friend earlier. I am the very name of our Father, as we know, is I am.
I am.
And before we were, I am was there before us, making the place. So I am lonely. I am there with you.
Yeah.
I am afraid. I know. I am there
Yeah.
with you. So to put those dots together, to me, I appreciate it tonight.
That is powerful. When you, let me make sure y'all got that. When you say to God, I am lonely, depressed, in trouble, whatever, you have actually said God's name, I am, at the beginning of the sentence. I am is the name Yahweh. It's the Hebrew, part of the Hebrew alphabet, the covenant-making God, the personal name of God. When Moses said to God, who do I say sent me? The answer was, tell him that I am has sent you. And I am is basically the Hebrew construct of the verb to be, which is past, present, future. That's the name of our God. So even when we say to God, I am whatever, we call his name before we actually tell him where we are and what we're experiencing. That's powerful. I may preach on that. Anyone else? Got one more of these to look at that's a little different than absence, but not too much different. Okay, keep thinking, and we'll take a look at one other psalm. I'm going to use a little bit of stuff, just a few pages out of my book, A Very Good God in a Badly Broken World. This is a book I wrote for people that have people in pits. I mean, people that have a hard time explaining God. The last third of this is about lament psalms. And this is one that's more about absence. Let me just read a few pages. They say that absence makes the heart grow fonder. I actually prefer presence. When presence becomes absence, we struggle. Ask the one who just buried a loved one, or moved halfway across the country from family and friends, or two college lovebirds separated during the Christmas break, or the parent adjusting to an empty nest. I tell you, presence is preferred. Absence cries out in cemeteries, pillows, letters, phone calls, and in prayers. Sometimes the absent one will come back, and sometimes they won't. Those who have never experienced painful absence are no better comfort than Job's friends. They know their lines, but their lines do not match the experience, and their advice is trite. Cheer up. You'll get over it. There'll be another. Get a hobby. Let's do lunch sometime. Or the classic, I'll be praying for you. People enduring absence have a hard enough time. Must they also endure a barrage of spiritual cliches? In Psalm 88, God is the absent one. When the psalm ends, the psalm ends without God ever showing up. The psalm is complete with the three classic lament moves that we talked about last week. Each sequential move grows more intense, and this psalm spirals down, down, down. Choice words are selected to express the sinking feeling of abandonment, and the fault of it all is laid at the feet of God. God has put this person in this predicament. Let me read to you Psalm 89. Again, the Message is the translation here. God, you're my last chance of the day. I spend the night on my knees before you. So put me on your salvation agenda, would you? Take notes on the trouble I'm in. I've had my fill of trouble. I'm camped at the edge of hell. I'm written off as a lost cause. One more statistic, a hopeless case. I'm abandoned as one already dead. One more body in a stack of corpses, and not so much as a gravestone. I'm a black hole in oblivion. You've dropped me into a bottomless pit, sunk me in pitch black abyss. I'm battered senseless by your rage, relentlessly pounded by your waves of anger. You turned my friends against me, made me horrible to them. I'm caught in a maze and can't find my way out. I'm blinded by tears of pain and frustration. I call to you, God. All day I call. I wring my hands. I plead for help. There's no mistaking the downward trajectory of this language. Listen to I'm going to read to you a series of words that were in that psalm. And listen how they all have to do with down. Hell, hopeless cause, abandoned, dead, corpses, gravestone, black hole, dropped, bottomless pit, sunk, pitch black abyss. That sinking feeling is what this psalm is all about. And then the lament begins again, only this time the vehicle of expression is those rhetorical questions that we ask. In each question, there is a good word and a bad word. The good word describes what God is usually like, and the bad word describes how God is being experienced right now. Here are the questions. Are the dead a live audience for your miracles? Do ghosts ever join the choirs that praise you? Does your love make any difference in a graveyard? Is your faithful presence noticed in the corridors of hell? Are your marvelous wonders ever seen in the dark? Your righteous ways noticed in the land of no memory? And you assume that for this guy, the answer to every one of those is no. And then comes that last consequential move where the emotions are uncorked and the words unvanished and the gloves come off and the distance deepens between God and the person praying. And the psalm fittingly ends with the word darkness. Here's how that psalm ends. I'm standing my ground, God, shouting for help. At my prayers every morning and on my knees each daybreak. Why, God, do you turn a deaf ear? Why do you make yourself scarce? For as long as I remember, I've been hurting. I've taken the worst you can hand out, and I've had it. Your wildfire anger has blazed through my life, and I'm bleeding black and blue. You attacked me fiercely from every side, raining down blows till I'm nearly dead. You made lover and neighbor alike dump me. The only friend I have left is darkness. You can almost hear Simon and Garfunkel start singing right about there. Hello, darkness, my old friend. I've come to talk with you again. And why not? It does not appear that God is participating in this conversation. This is one psalm that does not end with, and they all lived happily ever after. And then I close with this story. I couldn't help Louise. Her saintly Methodist mother was brutally beaten, raped, robbed, and murdered in the house where Louise grew up. Months after the funeral, Louise came to me with a wintry heart, cold, empty, emotionless. I was her young, wet behind the ears, fresh out of seminary pastor. I feebly tried to defend and explain the God who had abandoned her and her mother. I wish I'd known then what I know now about the function of lament in Scripture and life. All the time, I was trying to act like there were answers for these things, that God was on the throne and all was right in the world. I was faking it. To be frank, I was perturbed to be caught between her accusations and God's defense. And in the process of all that, I was missing the miracle that was right before my eyes. Here she was, feeling abandoned and cut off by God, yet she kept coming to church, expressing her pain, searching her scriptures, questioning God, banging on a heavenly door, provoking Yahweh, demanding that God, her covenant partner, act like a covenant partner. The miracle was that she didn't leave. She was faithful to the God that she believed had abandoned her. She was a better Christian than I was. If Louise were writing Psalm 88, I think it would go something like this. God, the nights are hardest. I feel so lonely. It is absence. not the absence of one whose friend moved to California, nor the absence of lovers separated for a summer, nor the absence of an empty nest. My absence is the cemetery kind. She won't come back. Mom is dead. I knew she'd die one day, and that's okay. But what kind of world permits the rape and murder of a Bible-believing, flower-raising Methodist mother? What kind of God permits the rape and murder of a Bible-believing, flower-raising Methodist mother? It's been a year now. He got a life sentence. Against my beliefs, I wanted him to fry. Now I hear he's got jailhouse religion. He made my earth hell, and now my heaven too. I can't escape him unless I choose hell for myself, which isn't out of the question right now. I've been to see the wise ones who preach from the book. Their advice is trite. She's with Jesus now, they say, but she's not with me. She's home, they say, but that little yellow house has chalk lines, blood stain remover, and a for sale sign in front. Read this book, it will help you, they say. But will it bring justice to earth? Will it erase rape? Will it cure hate? God, it didn't used to be like this between us. It was easy to pray. It was simple to believe. Now I have to remember her 83 years through the lens of one bloody moment. And I have to share the only haven left, which you call heaven, with a forgiven rapist, a murderer walking down the golden streets just a few feet behind Mom and me. Where are you in all this? You're absent, out of reach. I feel so lonely. God, the nights are hardest. I think that's the lament that Louise would write. And I close the chapter with these words. Sometimes the only authentic form faith can take is a complaint about absence. And for those who believe in God, when comes the dark night of the soul, when winter settles in the heart, when passion vacates our emotions, when happy songs are empty acts, the cry of absence is the only presence of God. If I were still Louise's pastor, I would say to her now, you amaze me. You have quite possibly the strongest faith I have ever seen. Most people would give up on God, but here you are, still waiting, still praying, still hoping. Where in the world did you get such a faith? And she might look at me and say, from the one who died abandoned on a cross. I hope, I pray that these kind of things never happen to you. But I'm so thankful for these lament psalms out of the pit because they tell me there is no place I can ever get in this life journey where God is not present in some way or the other, even if it is inside my groans and my prayers and my crying out to God, saying to God, why didn't you do something? And why did you let this happen? And where in the world are you right now? That is evidence of the presence of God in us. And in my opinion, that is remarkable faith, not a lack of that kind of faith. Okay, that's all I got tonight. What do you want to talk about? How many minutes do we have? 10? We got 10 minutes. Okay, this is your turn. Yes.
Yes. Going back to your first section, talking about Moses. I was sitting there thinking, and the Spirit was just talking to me about on both subjects. How Moses went through what he went through. And I was thinking about, they said God don't allow the wrong happen to you. If wrong didn't happen, how would good come out of the wrong?
Yeah.
So I was thinking about how Moses went through the process, getting to where he went. By being a baby, coming down the river, some famous woman found
Yep.
him, nursed him, even when he killed the man.
Yeah.
His journey, he didn't realize his journey was going to take him to the Red Sea, but it did. So I figured back to myself. I said, Lord, you say you know me before I was formed in my mother's womb.
Yeah.
So you know my destiny, even when I didn't know my destiny.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what I'm going through now. But there is an end to my destiny.
Yeah.
And that race I got to finish, no matter how the dark cloud come to me.
Yeah.
God's purpose gonna come out the whole situation. So the same thing about Moses. He didn't realize he had to kill somebody to get to his destiny.
Yeah.
So sometimes we have to allow wrong to take place for the good to come out of it. So I thank God for my wrong.
You opened a big old can of worms right there. I mean, a big old can of worms. This isn't a little can of worms. This is a big old can of worms. Did God will that Moses kill that man? I don't think so. I don't think so. Did God need for Moses to kill that man? No, not on your life. When I think about the foreknowledge of God, okay, I'm going to mess with some of your faith here. And let me say there's enough people that believe the exact opposite of what I'm going to say as believe what I'm about to say. I think the foreknowledge of God is not so much about a God who knows everything we're going to do and all the choices that we're going to make as a God who knows us from the beginning of time and is deeply aware. And I believe this kind of God has full control of all time from the very beginning to the very end. There is no lack of that whatsoever. But I also believe God has taken the massive risk of making us free creatures, which is why there's so much mess in the world today. I'm telling you, if God had made us kind of quasi-robots, it'd been a whole lot cleaner than what it is now. And what I believe the knowledge of God is about is God knows us so deeply that when we make decisions, God is well aware of why we are making that decision and all of the influences that are a part of that. We're never in a moment when God does not know us. God is not a God. I kind of say it like that. Matter of fact, it's in this book on a very good God in a badly broken world. It's in the Noah story. I don't think our lives are like a line of dominoes, and God set up all the events of our lives, and He knows it, that it's all set up and it's there, and God just tips one over when we're born or conceived, and it follows a path that God knows all the way to the end of that. Rather, I believe God knows us intricately from our mother's womb. We're fearfully and wonderfully made. And then God stands at every decision crossroad of our entire life, trying to guide us into the path that is good and the path that is right. He stands there. We take the wrong fork on this one. God's standing at the very next fork, trying to get us back on a path. God will never abandon us. He will stand in every moment of our life, calling us, guiding us, leading us into a way of life. There's not just one path or pattern for your life. It's kind of like, let's say you can't take an interstate, but you're going to go from here to Seattle, Washington, okay? There's a whole lot of different ways to get there and still get there. A whole lot of different ways. There's a whole lot of detours you can take and still get there. God's predestined will for us is that we be made and formed and shaped in the likeness of Jesus Christ. And God will use every choice we make to try to move us toward that. God's will is not so much that I go down here and hang a right, and then I go 3 blocks and take a left, and then I go 2 blocks straight and I turn into that driveway. God's will doesn't work like that. God's will is that along this way in life, I am becoming more and more like Jesus through each decision that I make, through each encounter that I have, through everything that I do, which means there is this beautiful respect of relationship, covenant relationship that happens between me and God, that He is guiding and leading and encouraging, but He is also taken one step back to allow me the freedom to make the choice that I would make. And then there are consequences for this choice. God doesn't even have to levy the consequences. The choice itself has the consequences built into it. People tell me all the time, why does God punish sin? I said, God doesn't punish sin. Sin punishes sin. Sin has its own seed of destruction built in the very act itself. God doesn't kind of have to rush in after we do something bad and, sprinkle some horrible consequences on top of it. When we make sinful choices, we actually invite the very consequences that happen because of that. So, as a result, this God who is working with us loves us enough to help pull us out of ditches and take us, we've gone down wrong paths like crazy. And, God's still standing there at the end of a dead end road going, don't keep going. Okay, let's turn around. Let's go a different path here. And this God will get us from birth all the way to standing in his presence one day, choice by choice, if we will listen to him as we go. So for me, I don't have this picture of a God that just kind of lined up the dominoes of my life, and he already knows everything I'm going to choose next week and the week beyond that, and already knew this. I actually think I dated 5 or 6 girls. I could have married any one of them. I made the best choice. I know I made the best choice in the process of that, and God probably gave me the wisdom to make the best choice that's there. But I say to college students all the time, there's not only one person on the whole planet you can marry. There's probably a whole lot of people that it'd be fine for you to fall in love with, and God would be pleased with that. Just ask God for wisdom to make a wise choice of a life partner that fits who you are and believes what you believe, and somebody that will walk alongside you the whole way. Now, when I look back on it, I think, man, I couldn't have married anybody except Denise and had the kind of life that I had. And the truth is, had I married anybody besides Denise, I wouldn't have had the life that I had. My life would have been very different. But it doesn't mean God could not have been Lord in that life also. So I want us to be sure we don't lock God into predestination boxes that prevent the kind of give and take in this relationship that we have with God. Because people who believe that, they come to the moment like Mark and Chrissy, and their infant baby dies, and they're walking across a Chicago cemetery with a guy who's holding a little casket in his hand, and they're going, this was a part of God's preordained, predestined plan for my life. And I don't want to tag God with that. I don't. Because I believe God is grieving the loss of that baby as much as those parents are. Babies die for all kind of physical reasons. I say the same thing to some of our students who are gay. I say to them, God doesn't hate you. God wasn't looking at the assembly line of humans being created one day and, I've got to get 5% of this group coming down the assembly line, the gay attraction. God wasn't doing that. We don't fully know why same-sex attraction happens. There's a lot of theories. I've got a couple of my own, but we don't know why. To tag God with that as if God has somehow branded a person is to misunderstand the very nature of a God who has put us in a world that is free enough that, food consequences into the human gene stream, disease that gets passed from generation to generation, poisons in waters, lead in paints. I mean, let's just name, 50 things that go into these bodies of ours that end up being us. God wasn't mixing all that stuff up back there somewhere. God is the one that, as these things happen to us, stands at the fork of that road saying, I'm here. I'm with you. Let's work through this together. I love you and I care about you. And to understand God in that way allows us to have what I love about the Psalms. It's a dynamic relationship. It's a lot like the relationship I have with my wife. We get angry with one another sometimes, and we tell each other that. I complain about some stuff. And I think God loves an aggressive covenant partner who's actually willing to be very honest with him about how we're experiencing life and how we feel about stuff. And for proof of that, just read the Psalms. You find the people of God being those kind of people in the middle of the world. And out of that, remember, only about a third of the Psalms are here. We're going to read, next week, we're going to start working on another section of the Psalms, which are Psalms of new orientation, which means out of these times, our trust in God grows. God saves us and we recognize it. God does something that is so praiseworthy that we can't find adequate words to express to God how much we love God. That out of the reality of these times, the bad times often are what make the good times so good. And that's why the relationship grows deeper and deeper with the Psalms. Right? Okay. There, I'm getting the signal that we're done, whether we were or not. So, forgive me. We weren't as conversational tonight as we've been on the others. I think I just kind of came in with two sermons in the back of my brain and dumped a little too much. Can I pray for us before we go? God, what I talked about tonight, there may be somebody here that's right in the middle of a dark night of the soul. I pray that this will be hopeful and helpful to them to recognize that where they are is not at the end of your anger, or that you're ticked with them and you've just walked away until they get their act straightened up, but that where they are now is a place that your son Jesus has already been, and that you are with them. It doesn't feel like it because they can't find any praise language. All they can find are cries and tears and groans. And you take up your presence in their cries and tears and groans. May they recognize you as present in that unique way to them and with them in the pit where they are. For those in this room who have been here before, help us never to forget what that was like, so that we may be friends to those who will someday find themselves there. And for those of us who have gotten out of the pit and are now standing on the rock of praise, help us to give you adequate thanks and praise for what you have done to bring us through the time when it felt like you were absent. May our testimony of you in a world that is really hurting, our witness to people that we work with and live among that don't want to come to church because their life is such a hellhole that they feel like they would be out of place in your presence. Help us to be able to tell the story to them of the fact that their prayer is actually in our Bible, and the feelings that they're having are actually the kind of feelings that you welcome being brought to you in the form of these lament psalms. Help us to give hope to a world that truly believes you don't care, or maybe even believes you're doing this to them. Help us to be able to be the kind of people who can live in the honesty of human pain with the depth of hope in Jesus Christ that can make a difference in others' lives. We would be privileged, oh God, to serve you in those ways. In the name of Jesus we pray. Amen and amen. God bless and keep you, friends.